Welcome to Dialogue. Today's topic is part of an extensive series on the modern dating crisis. We are going to shift gears from how we got here to the oft question of where are all the good men or women?
It's the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, it is without a doubt the defining lament of anyone trying to navigate relationships right now.
Absolutely. It feels like a collective sigh. You see it everywhere.
Everywhere, it's in the memes, it's, all over social media, those viral videos.
hmm
But I think it's most real in that 4 a.m. text you send to your friend after another date just kind of collapses into nothing.
Yes, that feeling that the dating pool isn't just shallow, but it's basically dry.
Fundamentally dry. That's a perfect way to put it.
And that feeling, that perception of scarcity, it seems to be universal. But it's also crucial to see how the public conversation shapes it. The online world, it really seems to fixate with so much energy on where are all the good men.
Right. It's a very loud part of the conversation.
It is. So for this deep dive, we have to recognize that this profound feeling of frustration with what's available, it's actually shared.
That recognition of the mirror image is, I think, the most critical starting point if we want to get anywhere. Because while that question about men might, dominate the headlines, the parallel, often quieter question,
Where are all the good women?
exactly.
Valid.
It is just as prevalent, just as valid, and it's fueled by the exact same set of frustrations. So our mission today isn't to, pick a side or validate one complaint over the other.
No.
We're here to stop arguing about who's failing and start analyzing the shared systemic distress that makes both sides feel like they're searching in an empty room.
Okay, so then let's define the source of these questions, because the
Yeah.
analysis we've seen is incredibly clear. This isn't coming from simple malice or bitterness.
Not at all. It's not because people are unwilling to try. These questions are symptoms of something much deeper and I think much more painful.
Which is what?
Well, first, they are rooted in a deep and I'd say necessary longing for connection, for real stability. This isn't just about a date on a Friday night.
It's about secure attachment, a
Yeah.
core human need.
Precisely. And they're fueled by just absolute fatigue. I mean, the sheer exhaustion from putting so much effort into dating apps, into social situations, only to be met again and again with disappointment.
And that disappointment is huge. It's not just from failed relationships, but from the failed attempts at relationships, the ones that never even get off the ground.
Those near misses can hurt just as much, can't they?
Right.
And then, maybe most critically, all of this reflects this immense confusion. People are just trying to navigate these completely contradictory cultural ideas about what a relationship should be, what gender roles should look like now.
So when you frame it that way, the person asking where are all the good partners isn't really launching an attack.
No, they're expressing pain. They're saying, I have this deep, essential human desire for connection, but the reality I keep running into, the ghosting, the hedging, the lack of clarity, it just doesn't support that desire at all.
Okay, so this deep dive is an honest look at a shared crisis. We're explicitly not framing this as a gender war.
Yeah, no. We are analyzing the ecosystem, looking at all the forces, psychological, cultural, even economic memor that conspire to make modern dating feel so broken and, well, so lonely.
We're charting the choppy water we're all swimming in, not trying to figure out who made the waves.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And to do that right, we have 5 core areas to unpack.
Yeah.
First, we need to really dissect the shared feeling of scarcity. Why does everyone feel like partners are disappearing?
Okay.
Then we'll look at the internal things that distort our vision, expectations and entitlement. After that, we have to get into the colder reality of market dynamics and our own cognitive biases.
Yeah.
Finally, we have to tackle the most uncomfortable part, how our own individual behaviors, which are born from our own fatigue, end up contributing to the distress of everyone else.
Okay, let's unpack that first point then. The shared feeling of scarcity. You use the word fatigue, and I think that's the perfect place to start. Why do both sides genuinely believe the pool is shrinking, and what is the real emotional cost of believing that?
The emotional toll is where it all begins. I mean, think about modern dating, especially app-based dating. The whole structure of it demands a huge amount of effort for what is, pretty consistently, a low reward.
Right. You spend hours making a profile, trying to be authentic but also appealing. Then you have to do all that initial banter with, 10 different people at once?
And that's cognitively exhausting. You're constantly shifting your tone, your context. You invest real emotional energy into maybe meeting someone, maybe over several weeks of just texting.
And after all of that investment, the return is so often nothing. It ends in ghosting. Or you finally meet and realize there's a huge incompatibility you could have seen weeks ago.
Or just a simple lack of follow-through. And that repetition, that's the key mechanism here. When you repeat that cycle high investment, low return over and over, say 5, 10, 20 times, the emotional algorithm in your brain, it generates this very powerful, very protective hypothesis.
Which
The
is?
hypothesis is the problem can't be my strategy because I'm putting in all this work. Therefore, the problem has to be the supply.
So the conclusion that there just aren't enough good partners becomes a defense mechanism.
It's a deeply ingrained psychological survival mechanism. It's designed to protect your ego from the repeated personal pain of rejection.
That makes perfect sense. I mean, it's so much easier for your brain to decide the whole environment is bad
Yeah,
than to confront the idea that maybe I'm the one failing to connect.
exactly. But what really compounds that fatigue, even beyond the bad communication, is the confusion you mentioned earlier. These
Yeah.
conflicting cultural expectations.
The cultural whiplash.
Yes, that's it. And it is a massive source of this systemic disappointment. I mean, just think about the messages people are getting today. On one hand, there's this huge pressure and a real personal desire for traditional commitment. Financial stability, building a future, that emotional safety you get from a dedicated partner.
But at the very same time, you're being told you have to value absolute independence, total self-sufficiency. And crucially, emotional detachment is framed as the ultimate sign of modern strength.
To be vulnerable is to be weak. To need someone is somehow a failure at being a modern adult.
So now try to find a partner who fits both of those ideals. It's impossible.
It's profoundly contradictory. You're looking for someone who is completely committed to traditional partnership values, showing up, being reliable, planning for the future, and is also totally autonomous, non-demanding, and never vulnerable.
It's like asking for a building to be both solid as a rock and completely transparent. The search itself becomes geometrically impossible.
And you see it play out. You meet
Mhm.
someone who leans more toward that traditional commitment side,
Yeah.
and they get dismissed as, what, needy, dependent.
Right. And then you meet someone who really embodies that absolute independence ideal, and they're seen as emotionally unavailable or self-absorbed.
This dissonance, it just creates this constant low-level anxiety.
Mhm.
People feel completely rudderless. They can't even articulate what they want because the cultural scripts are fighting each other.
And that difficulty, that's what feeds the scarcity question.
Fundamentally, it's not that good people have vanished. It's that the definition of what makes a good person acceptable or desirable is
Yeah.
being constantly erased and rewritten by these contradictory messages.
So if the fatigue is the engine and the confusion is this map that leads you nowhere, the result is this collision between this intense emotional longing and repeated failure.
Mm.
That deep human need for a secure bond is hardwired into us. So when that essential desire is constantly met with superficial chats, ghosting, hedging, the gap between what you want and what you're actually seeing widens into a chasm.
And that chasm is where this crisis lives. When that moment hits, the scarcity question just pours out. It stops being a complaint about one person or one bad date.
And it becomes what?
It becomes an expression of profound confusion about the entire ecosystem. It's a signal of a painful failure to match that internal need for connection with the external reality of the dating world. We have to see these questions as a symptom of widespread distress, not just a complaint from a picky person.
So the question they're really asking is, why is the system making me feel so lonely when I am literally surrounded by people?
Exactly. And now we have to look at the internal factors that unfortunately actively make the problem worse, no matter how many people are actually in the dating pool.
Okay, so if the scarcity is rooted in that fatigue and confusion, the next layer here is how our own internal framework, our expectations, our sense of entitlement act as this powerful magnifying lens that distorts the reality of who is actually out there.
It's a cognitive trap, a huge one. It's what allows us to look at a genuinely good potential partner, someone who is kind, compatible, available, and immediately find a reason to see them as unworthy or lacking.
And that process effectively shrinks the dating pool in our own minds.
Exactly. It reduces the perceived size of what's available, no matter what the actual demographics of your city are.
So let's start with inflated expectations. You mentioned media, and its role here cannot be overstated. We're just constantly absorbing these highly curated, often fictionalized pictures of romance that set an impossible standard.
The benchmark has shifted from, sustainable compatibility to something like mythological perfection. We absorb this idea that a partner should not just meet our needs, they should instantly solve all of our existential problems.
Be a therapist, a life coach, a financial advisor.
And a perfect aesthetic accessory, all while being a soulmate who never causes any conflict. The bar isn't just high. It requires a level of human flawlessness that simply doesn't exist.
So let's make this concrete with that 8 out of 10 scenario. I think that's so important.
Okay, yes. So let's say you meet a prospective partner, and they have 8 out of 10 qualities that make for a solid, committed foundation. They're kind, they're stable, they communicate well about the big stuff, you share core values.
They treat their family well, they're financially responsible, the important things.
The really important things. In any healthy previous dating context, that person is objectively and unequivocally a good partner. They represent a solid foundation for a real relationship.
But this hyper-selective, high-expectation culture we're in now, it refuses to see the 8 points of compatibility.
It completely ignores them. Instead, the focus just laser locks onto the two missing points. Maybe they aren't 6 feet tall, or maybe their career isn't as prestigious as the one you imagined, or they don't share your, really niche hobby.
And the outcome is what?
Immediate disappointment, rejection. Sometimes it's rationalized as, oh, we just lacked chemistry, but it is fundamentally a cognitive failure. The partner gets rejected not because they're genuinely a bad match, but because they failed to meet this idealized, fictional 10 out of 10 version you've synthesized from movies and Instagram.
So the result is devastatingly simple. By focusing on those 2 missing points, we artificially shrink the available pool of partners. We're eliminating people who have all the necessary elements for a good life together.
Partners who would have been seen as excellent prospects a generation ago are now dismissed as lacking, just because the cultural benchmark for acceptable human flaws has shrunk to basically 0. It's a primary internal way we generate this feeling of scarcity.
And this leads us right into the entitlement trap.
The necessary psychological sibling to inflated expectations. Yes. The entitlement trap is that core belief that you are owed a high-quality, perfect partner without having to do the work yourself.
Without sufficient reciprocal effort or self-reflection or personal growth.
Exactly. It shifts the entire dynamic from seeking a mutual journey where two imperfect people grow together to basically shopping for a finished, perfect product who will magically fix your own issues.
And you see this play out all the time in the feedback loop. Someone will complain bitterly about the lack of available partners who are, say, emotionally mature and financially stable.
But then when you look inward, that same person might be refusing to address their own fundamental issues. Maybe they have terrible conflict management skills, or they avoid any conversation that requires real emotional vulnerability.
So they're basically waiting for someone who is entirely stable and patient enough to handle their instability.
Without recognizing that a partnership is a two-way street. It requires reciprocal emotional labor. They feel entitled to a perfect partner while offering, a partial, unfinished version of themselves.
So that entitlement, it leads to this constant critical focus on judging other people against that rigid checklist we talked about.
Right. The priority shifts completely away from genuine connection and compromise, and it just becomes an assessment, a checklist where the other person has to prove their worthiness. And that critical filter is so powerful, it can blind you to the actual goodness, the 8 out of 10 that might be standing right in front of you.
Further cementing the belief that the good ones have all vanished. The scarcity is, in a very real way, manufactured internally.
It really is.
That's fascinating. The cognitive mechanism there is that the high standards, they aren't really protective. They become an avoidance strategy.
That's a great way to put it.
By having impossible standards, you have a ready-made excuse to reject everyone and avoid the risk of real vulnerability.
Precisely. If I can hold on to the belief that they are all inadequate, I never have to confront the uncomfortable idea that maybe I am the one preventing the relationship from happening. Or that maybe the path forward involves vulnerability and compromise, which are things I am actively trying to avoid.
So now we pivot from those internal distortions to, well, external, almost macroeconomic forces. Market dynamics. The term sexual market dynamics sounds very cold.
It does sound impersonal, but it's a critical lens. All it really means is the aggregate supply, demand, and relative value individuals bring to the dating pool. And that value is always fluid. It shifts based on cultural and economic changes.
And these dynamics can help explain why certain desirable traits suddenly seem to be incredibly rare.
Think of it like a job market. If there's a sudden economic shift, certain skills become extremely high in demand. The same thing happens in dating.
So for instance, let's look at demographic shifts. The increased economic independence and educational attainment for women, which is an overwhelmingly positive social trend.
A huge positive.
But it completely shifts the dating calculus. If one group no longer needs a partner for, say, material survival, their selectivity for non-material qualities goes way up.
Way up. They're now selecting for emotional intelligence, communication skills, a shared life vision, alignment on core values.
It's a massive recalibration of value.
It is. Where stability and being a provider might have been the main currencies decades ago, those are now just the entry fee. They're table stakes. To be considered high value today requires mastering these complex emotional and soft skills.
Which makes the search more complex, and it leads a lot of people to feel like they can't keep up with these rapidly escalating requirements.
The bar has risen, and
Yeah.
that creates a very real scarcity of people who have kept pace with that shift.
And we also see this play out geographically, don't we? Our sources point to this increasing clustering of highly educated, financially successful people into just a few major cities.
Yes, if high-value partners, defined by, say, professional success or education, are all disproportionately concentrated in New York, London, or San Francisco, then people dating outside those dense competitive zones will genuinely experience a demographic shortage.
So the good ones haven't disappeared from the planet.
No, they're just monopolized or concentrated elsewhere. And that creates a very real, verifiable scarcity for millions of people in smaller markets.
So the external dynamics set the stage, but the perception of scarcity is really cemented and fueled by our own internal psychological biases, specifically confirmation bias.
Ah.
Let's talk about how a string of bad dates actually warps the brain's filtering mechanism.
Okay, so when you experience that string of disappointments, the ghosting, the misleading, the emotional pain, your mental filter, which is designed to keep you safe, it starts to prioritize negative data. The brain is just trying to avoid future pain.
It's a textbook case of confirmation bias becoming a survival strategy.
Exactly. You walk into the next first date, and your mental script is already saying, this is probably going to fail just like the last three because people are unreliable.
So when that date, who is just an imperfect human being, inevitably shows a minor flaw, they're a few minutes late, there's an awkward moment, that flaw gets magnified.
It's immediately flagged as critical evidence, and it confirms the deeply held protective bias. No suitable people exist. Your brain is efficiently seeking evidence to support its pessimistic conclusion, which allows you to feel justified in pulling back or staying emotionally distant.
And that is the psychological fuel for this entrenched scarcity perception. It's less about a true demographic shortage and much more about a learned psychological filter that's become hyper-vigilant.
It's just safer to assume everyone is bad than to let yourself be vulnerable again.
And this leads to the ultimate paradox, which is that increased disappointment leads directly to increased selectivity.
Yes, when you feel repeatedly burned or let down, the most rational emotional response is to put up higher walls. You create a stricter, more complex checklist, and you reject more people preemptively as a form of self-defense.
But the consequence of that protective move is brutal.
It is. This increased selectivity, while it feels psychologically safe, dramatically shrinks the pool of partners you're even willing to consider. By making that checklist longer and more rigid, you end up confirming your initial belief that good partners are scarce.
It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy rooted in disappointment and defensiveness. You aren't dating a scarce pool, you're applying an impossibly selective filter to a normal-sized pool of imperfect people.
The irony is just, it's brutal. The mechanism designed to protect you from hurt is the very same mechanism that prevents you from finding connection. You're seeking safety through isolation.
That realization brings us to the most painful, most circular part of this crisis. How our individual behavior, born from this fatigue and selectivity, actually contributes to the overall ecosystem distress.
This is where we have to acknowledge the shared contribution. Everyone across the gender and orientation spectrum is simultaneously a victim of this chaotic ecosystem and an active daily contributor to its toxicity.
Our own defensive, jaded behaviors are adding the negative data points that fuel the scarcity belief for everyone else.
Exactly. Let's look beyond just ghosting. Think about more nuanced behaviors like soft rejection, where instead of a clear conversation, communication just slowly fades into ambiguity.
Or breadcrumbing.
Ugh, yes, where you get these intermittent low-effort messages just to keep someone on the hook with no real commitment or clarity. Or orbiting, where someone who ghosted you still watches your stories just enough to keep their presence known.
And these behaviors are all driven by what? Fear of confrontation?
Fear of confrontation, fear of commitment, or just simple emotional laziness. For the person doing it, it feels like they're just avoiding conflict. But for the person on the receiving end, these are profound acts of devaluation.
They cause confusion, they extend the anxiety, and they provide strong negative data for that person's internal algorithm.
That person leaves the interaction thinking, another confirmation that people are emotionally unreliable, that they hedge commitment, that they'll waste my time. And that is the aggregate effect. That is the inflation of collective fatigue.
So if one person treats the dating app environment carelessly, treating others as disposable.
The resulting pain and sense of devaluation experienced by their partner adds a massive negative weight to the collective perception. If, say, 70% of dating interactions involve some form of emotional hedging, then 70% of the dating population is constantly absorbing this low-level emotional trauma.
Which confirms their belief that dating is fundamentally painful and unsatisfying, and therefore that good partners, meaning partners with basic emotional clarity, are scarce.
This is the engine of the crisis. It's the negative feedback loop.
Okay, let's map that cycle up very clearly because I think understanding this is the key to breaking it.
Okay. Step 1. An individual experiences disappointment. Let's say they were breadcrumbed for 3 months only to find out the person was never serious.
Step 2. The individual internalizes this disappointment. They adopt the scarcity belief everyone is emotionally unavailable, and they become defensive. Jaded. They decide, I have to protect myself next time.
Right. And step 3. Because they are now defensive and operating from a place of self-protection, they start exhibiting slightly poor behavior themselves. Maybe they pull back on commitment early, they become overly cautious, or they approach new dates with this cynical, critical eye
They're looking for reasons to reject someone preemptively.
before they can get hurt again. And then step 4. This defensive, jaded behavior, which was born out of their own previous pain, contributes directly to the distress and fatigue of their next partner. That partner then experiences disappointment, becomes defensive, and the cycle just perpetuates endlessly.
It's the tragedy of the commons, but for dating. Each person's rational effort to protect their own vulnerability, when you multiply it by millions, degrades the very shared environment they're all trying to thrive in.
Nobody intended to make dating terrible. In fact, everyone intended to protect themselves. But all those defensive actions, collectively, created this outcome of toxicity and perceived scarcity.
It's a really uncomfortable truth, isn't it? The scarcity we perceive is often a direct result of the defensive mechanisms we deploy to cope with that perceived scarcity.
Which is why moving past blame is not just a polite suggestion. It's a strategic necessity for survival in the modern dating world. If every individual focuses only on what the other gender or group is doing wrong, the ecosystem just continues to rot.
Because the focus is always outward, never inward.
The only way to alleviate the shared distress is to recognize how our own personal behavior, driven by our own defensiveness, contributes to the collective exhaustion we are all complaining about.
This implies something pretty profound that should probably make everyone listening pause. That obsessive search for good partners might actually need to start with a serious, honest audit of our own role in this climate.
Absolutely. We have to ask, are we contributing to the very fatigue and confusion we're complaining about? Are we acting from a place of entitlement, demanding a perfect partner while offering minimal reciprocal effort?
Are we rejecting those 8 out of 10 partners because we're irrationally chasing some mythological 10?
If the answer to any of those questions is yes, even a little bit, then we are part of the engine driving this perception of scarcity. To break that negative feedback loop, an individual has to commit to engaging with kindness, clear communication, and vulnerability, even when the environment tells you that cynicism is the safer, more rational choice.
That's the only point of entry to cleaning up this shared space.
It requires an intentional cognitive shift, a shift away from the belief that the pool is empty and toward the belief that the pool is merely filled with imperfect people who, just like you, are probably scared and defensive.
So this deep dive has really shown that the question, where are all the good men, women, is so much more complex than a simple complaint. It's an urgent expression of genuine longing and deep systemic fatigue.
It's driven by cultural confusion, conflicting expectations, psychological filtering, and the devastating collective toll of our own defensive behaviors.
The central problem isn't necessarily a factual demographic shortage. It's a systemic failure rooted in hyperselectivity and our emotional defense mechanisms.
The scarcity we feel is largely created and maintained by the highly distorted lenses we use to view the dating world, lenses that are crafted from fear and the pursuit of perfection.
Okay, so as we close this conversation, here is a provocative thought for you to carry forward. Given that this perception of scarcity is so often driven by internal psychological factors, by entitlement, and by chasing these media-driven ideals, what if the greatest challenge isn't actually finding a good partner who meets that impossible standard?
Instead, what if the greatest challenge and the only necessary path toward a sustainable connection is fundamentally redefining what good actually means in a healthy, imperfect, and sustainable human context? What if good isn't flawless compatibility, but a shared willingness to be vulnerable, to compromise, and to put in mutual effort, even when the entire dating world tells you to be guarded and demanding? That shift in definition, that might be the catalyst we all need.
Food for thought.
If you enjoyed this conversation, please like, subscribe, and share this video. Also, let us know in the comments what really stood out to you in this conversation, and if there's any related topic or new topic that you would like covered in a future video.